Stephen Morales here. We're going to cover some modifications that you can do for the burpee. Typically when somebody's trying to do a burpee, one of the common complaints that I'll hear is that their knees or ankles hurt, their lower back hurts, or their wrists hurt. So we're going to cover some of the things that you can do to help with these problems. Now, first thing I want to cover is actually with your wrists. I actually see burpees done wrong more often than any other variation with it because of their hands. What happens is, we call them burpee fingers, is they'll place the fingers down like this to do the movement, right? Where we want those hands flat. And I'll show you the movement itself is just jumping back, jumping in, and then jumping up. I think at this point most people know what a burpee is, but just to clarify. Now, a lot of people actually end up putting their fingertips down. We call these burpee fingers, like I mentioned. This is not ideal. All right. Most people are doing it because they lack the range of motion to jump their feet back. It feels awkward when they try and put their hands down, or it's putting too much pressure on the wrists. So what we want is the hands spread apart, right? This is going to have more power to it. So we want to place our hands there. We want the hands slightly what's called adducted, just tilt them out a little bit, so that when you place your hands down like this, that elbow pit is facing forward, all right? We're here, which creates a more stable shoulder, elbow, and wrist, all right? Making sure that I'm not leaning either. A lot of people are leaned back, right? Or they're too far forward, or their hands are too far apart. We want to make sure that that's directly underneath the shoulder. That's going to create a more stable position, all right? Don't do burpee fingers. That's the first thing. So with that, if your wrist is hurting, you can do a modification where you're going to actually stack. You're actually going to do like fists, because some people can't do this. They haven't built into it. So we want to do fists, where we'll place our fist down like this. We'll jump out, we'll jump in, and then we can jump up like that. That's a modification. I don't have dumbbells here with me. You could grip onto dumbbells. Build in and progress over time though, so that you're going to eventually put your hands flat if you can. One of the reasons why it hurts for most people, we don't use our hands like we used to. We end up putting them in very set positions. We work on computers all day long. We're using our phone all day long. So we're losing dexterity, stability, strength, and flexibility in the wrist. So you go to put it in a position that you should be able to handle, and your body can't. It hurts, okay? You need to do these more frequently, and you'll actually build into that over time. Now, that's the first modification I want you to work with, right? Fists if you need it. You can actually grab onto dumbbells if you have it. After that, you could actually elevate yourself too, because the next step in that, we're going to move from wrist, you're actually going to go into helping with the knees, the hips, or the ankles, elevation. If I go up higher, like from this chair for instance, I'm not compressing my body as much. The reason most people have their knees hurt is they come down here and they don't have the range of motion, whether that has to do with mobility, flexibility, or they have an injury, right? They've had surgery on their knees, a meniscal tear, something like that. We're going to elevate our body with this, all right? So once we elevate our body, and I'll start here with this lower setting, I can take some of that pressure off, and I can make it so that I'm not going to bend my knees as much. I'm standing close to the object. I can bend down, essentially hinging like I would for a deadlift. I can jump my feet back, in, and then up. And I can scale all the way to a higher object, like a chair or a stool or something like that. Now, use whatever you have, be creative here, but figure out what you can use that's going to allow you to do this. Because I know a lot of people are doing boot camps or something like that. They might not necessarily have that object with them. In that instance, I would figure out something that's lightweight that I could bring with me to modify for some of these movements, okay? So that's going to help alleviate some of that ankle problem, the ankle problems, the hips or the knees, sometimes with the lower back too. The next variation that you can, let's say you're doing this and you're still feeling it just because of the impact of jumping on your knees. What you can do after that is called a step back, all right? So what I can do with that is I'll place on the item and I can step a leg back and then the other leg back. I want to be in alignment. I don't want my lower back to slouch, and I don't want to see my hips shoot up in the air. And then once I'm here, I can step back in, and I don't need to jump here. I could raise my arms, or if you're still capable of, you can do a little bit of a mini jump here. I could scale that all the way up here also. Back, in, raise up. You can layer these modifications on, but create a progression. Elevation is one, step backs is another, and you can actually do step backs all the way to the ground if I needed to. Let's say I've progressed through that, I can then come down here, back, back, in, hinge, and then I can come up, all right? Hold yourself accountable to progressing in these. Some people, they've had carpal tunnel, they've had surgery, they just physically can't progress, that's fine. Figure out what you can and cannot do and what you can default to if things start to hurt, right? So that you know what your backup plan is, that way you don't just stop or you keep pushing through it and you end up hurting yourself, which is one of the things I see most often when people are doing movements in the gym, okay? So these are some modifications that you can do for that. I am gonna say too, with the stool or the bench or anything like that, I'm grabbing the outside of this so that I can stack the pressure on the base of my palm. I don't want the whole hand to grab this, because if I do that, I'm pushing my elbow out. I'm putting this at a bad angle. I'm gonna hurt myself, I'm gonna hurt my wrist. Edge of my palm here, right? That way all that weight is stacking directly up to my shoulder. You can usually tell if you need to modify a movement based off how you're utilizing your back. If I'm here and I go like this, right, I might need to modify, right, because I don't quite have the range of motion. Or I'm jumping out and I'm immediately slamming my back down like this. You might need to modify and elevate your body because you just don't quite have the core strength or the back strength or the leg strength, whatever it is, just yet. Build into these movements, all right? So hold yourself accountable to progressing if you can. Do these modifications, figure out, test this stuff. Know what you can progress to or scale back to if needed, all right? If you have any questions or comments, please do that in the section below. Make sure you're doing this. We talk about this in the MoveNat system. Speed hides inefficiencies, and just because you're effective at a movement doesn't mean you're efficient at it. Don't just do these and just because you're doing the movement think that it's okay if you're hurting yourself. Become efficient, right? Own these positions, own these movements if you need to scale first and then progress. Don't just go right to the hard thing because everybody else is doing. That's where people get hurt. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you're doing those modifications.